Chapter 15 of Mary's Grammar by Jane MARCET. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jennifer Dallman. Relative Pronouns, Lesson 7. At the next lesson of grammar, Mary came skipping into the room with her book in her hand, saying, "Now, Mamma, for the rest of the pronouns." "The next class of pronouns," said her mother, "are called relative because they relate to some words said before. There are but 3 relative pronouns: who, which, and that. They will be very easy to remember, Mamma, being so few." "But Mary, I do not mean that you should remember them like a parrot. You must understand them, and then you will remember them equally well, were there few or many. In order to understand them, you must know to what words they relate. If I say, 'The man who brought me a letter,' to what word does who relate?" "To the man, certainly." "Very well. I will now give you a more complicated example. The tree that was blown down yesterday fell near Charles, who was sadly frightened." "That relates to the tree," said Mary, "but who relates to Charles being frightened?" "Now, Mamma," she added, "it is my turn to give an example." "Well, my dear, think of one, and try to introduce in it all 3 pronouns." Mary thought for a long time, looking very grave all the while, and at last she said, "Do you remember the pretty doll that Grandmamma gave me, which has a pink frock? I have lent it to Sophie, who is very fond of playing with it." "Very well, but what made you look so grave, my dear? I expected you to say something very serious instead of talking about playing with dolls." "Oh, Mamma, it is so difficult to find out how to place the pronouns that one cannot help looking grave, even when one is thinking of something amusing." "Well now, Mary," said her mother, "you may be really grave, for I am going to teach you a very hard word." Mary made a long face and listened with great attention to her mother, who proceeded. "The word to which the pronoun relates is called the antecedent, which means something that goes before. Can you remember that word?" "Oh, yes, it is not so difficult as I thought when you told me to be so grave. I shall remember the word antecedent, because it's like the antechamber, before you go into the drawing room." "Now then," said her mother, "I will give you a sentence in which you shall find out the nouns that are the antecedents to their relative pronouns. The sheep which were feeding on the common were scared by a little boy who ran hallooing after them, and the dog that guarded them had much ado to bring them back." "Sheep," said Mary after a thoughtful pause, "is the antecedent of which. Boy is the antecedent of who, and dog is the antecedent of that. How foolish it was," continued she, "for such large animals as sheep to be afraid of a little boy. And pray, Mamma, have the relative pronouns numbers and genders and cases, like the personal pronouns?" "Which and that," replied her mother, "never change, but who has 3 cases. The possessive case of who is whose, and the objective whom. Thus you might ask, 'Who called here yesterday?' And I should answer, 'A lady whom I saw, but whose name I forget.' Can you tell me the cases of these 3 pronouns?" "Yes, I believe I can," said Mary. "In the first place, they all relate to the lady, who is nominative. Whom must be the objective, because the lady was the object spoken to, and whose is the possessive case, because the lady must have a name. Though you forgot it, Mamma," said Mary, laughing. "True," replied her mother. "The pronouns who, whose, and whom are used in general for rational beings, that is, men, women, and children. Which is more correctly applied to animals and things. You do not say the horse who trotted, or the tree who is in blossom, but the horse that trotted, and the tree which is in blossom. And would it be wrong to say the tree that is in blossom? No, the pronoun that may be applied to all sorts of nouns, for you may say the child that played with the flower that I gathered, and the box that I opened, with equal propriety. But as the pronoun who is in general confined to rational beings, it is considered more appropriate to them than the pronoun that. Who, whose, and whom, when they are used to ask questions, are called interrogative pronouns, as, 'Who is that?' 'To whom did you speak?' 'Whose carriage is that?' I shall always know them," said Mary, "by the note of interrogation." We shall now finish our lesson, continued her mother, but we must have one more on pronouns before we come to our story. The thought of the story always gave Mary courage to get through the difficult parts of her lesson. It is true that parsing the story obliged her sometimes to work hard, but she knew that nothing could be well learned without taking pains. Then she was really fond of learning new things, and she thought any painstaking better than being ignorant. End of chapter 15.